Good afternoon. I'm Susan Karmanian, the Dean of the Hamad bin Khalifa University College of Law here in Doha, state of Qatar. And I would like to welcome you to what promises to be an enlightening conversation about COVID-19 and employment laws and regulations. Since March, when a lot of the world went into some form of lockdown, the concept of the workplace has changed, as has the notion of work itself and the concept of leave. Further, the concept of a safe environment, a safe work environment, has taken on a new meaning, particularly when the key factor affecting safety cannot be seen. To help us sort through these and other issues, we have a distinguished panel of experts. These experts deal with these kind of issues on a daily, if not an hourly basis. We are honored to be able to coordinate this session today with the Qatar Financial Center and to have the Financial Center on board with us to explore these and other issues. Each of our distinguished panelists will speak up to 7 minutes. So this is a 1-hour session. They will have comments and remarks, reflections, given their various work in the area and to the extent they are studying the issues as well, reflecting those studies. And we'll have ample of time after the presentations of all the panelists for what I hope will be a lively question and answer session. For those who are in the audience, please send your questions and answers through the Q&A function. I'll be monitoring those and we'll be bringing the questions to the table after the principal presentations. So without any further ado, let me just quickly introduce our distinguished panel. I am not even remotely going to do justice to them due to time constraints, but to just identify briefly who they are, their affiliation, and the general subject they will cover this afternoon. Our first speaker is Luigia Ingiani, who is a commissioner at the Employment Standards Office at the Qatar Financial Center. And she's going to give us background into the overall legal framework. And then after hearing from Luigia, we will hear from Alex Nasser, who is a migration and employment specialist at the International Labor Organization. And she will give the perspective of international standards and changes at the international level with regard to the pandemic. And then after Alex, we'll hear from Sheikh Jassim Saud Al-Fani, who is the Senior AGM Chief Human Capital Officer at Commercial Bank here in Doha, who's going to give us a perspective of the practical implications, what's going on in the workplace on a daily and, as I said earlier, hourly basis. And then finally, after hearing from Sheikh Jassim, we will hear from Daniel Patterson, who is a Data Protection Officer, Employment Standards Office at the Qatar Financial Center. Obviously, issues concerning information and privacy have come to the fore as well due to the changes in the work environment. So, Luigia, I pass the floor to you and look forward to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan, for being such a great and passionate partner in organizing this conversation today. And a special thanks to Professor George Dimitropoulos, who is always committed in finding opportunities for partnerships and knowledge sharing. Thanks to both of you. This conversation today is very important. The world of work has been profoundly impacted by the COVID-19, and the entire legal landscape has been shaken up. The basic concept of work have changed. The workplace, to begin with, which now includes our homes, our private and public spaces, and the new risks, often more dangerous, to which the workers have is exposed, which now include domestic violence, bullying, harassment, cyberbullying, risks to data protection, to the privacy that Daniel will address shortly, but also the underestimated risks caused by the lack of boundaries between private and working life that the remote work has imposed. For example, working around the clock, hyperconnectivity, digital intoxication, loss of sleep, loss of human connections, all elements that have impacted the mental health of workers immensely. And also, last but not least, the higher vulnerability of women who have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19. Now, all these aspects have one common denominator, the workers' health, that now, as never before, must be put at the center. And ensuring safety and health in all workplaces to all women and men, and defining specific measures tailored to the different risks to which women and men are exposed to in the workplace must become a policy priority, not only to protect jobs and businesses, but also to bring the economy to a sustainable recovery direction. Now, during the crisis, the peak of the crisis, the measures that employers had to take to reduce their financial losses required a reinterpretation, let's say, of the existing laws on redundancy, working hours, change in the scope of work, sick leave, unpaid leave. And for example, the purpose of the part-time, which has been one of the most effective tools to reduce the cost, the labor costs, and maintain the workforce. But I want to say that in addition to the laws, the legal principles, employers had to apply the unwritten laws of humanity to minimize the consequences, serious consequences of isolation and lack of human connections. Employers had all of a sudden no longer control on the workers' activity, on the jobs. They had to delegate more. They had to trust more. They had to give permission to employees and workers to make mistakes. They had to manage the new risks related to the privacy of the workers in the way they work, the way they monitor productivity. Employers had to go back to the basic human needs: autonomy, sense of purpose, sense of belonging, sense of accomplishment, and use care, empathy, compassion to really minimize the impact that the remote work has caused on the mental health of people. Now, although we know that the pandemic is temporary by nature, we also know that it will impact on a long term the world of work, and therefore the laws, the labor laws, must be retailored on the new, changed and constantly changing world of work. Now, during the last plenary session of the World of Work Dialogue organized by the WHO, the World Health Organization, on behalf of the working group I was part, we identified some of the major priorities that, in our opinion, policymakers should address. First of which is, of course, the implementation of international labor standards that Alex is going to address shortly, but also definition of the new concept of the workplace I mentioned before, the new risks that we have to put in the risk assessment, the extension of the occupational safety and health protection to those working in the informal economy, as well as the promotion of adequate sick leave, paid sick leave policies or unemployment benefits, and increase to mental health resources. But most of all, the importance of defining and developing a compelling narrative to make clear that occupational safety and health is a business investment. Because the right to health is not only the workers' right, but it's also the employer's right, the right of the employers to benefit from productive workers who can perform their very best only if they are healthy. Healthy employees means healthy, resilient, sustainable business. This is why we need to adapt the laws, the existing laws, to the new reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luigia, for reminding us about the fact that we have a legal regime, yet there has been the need for sort of improvising, so to speak, in light of the situation, but also the focus on humanity. And I think that that is absolutely critical. And I think each workplace has been reflecting on that very issue. Anybody in management clearly has had to deal with that. So, so far we did get one comment, and I believe in making sure everything is working. Somebody said, "Why no sound?" But we could hear Louisa just fine. So from the Q&A front, if there are others that are having sound issues, please let us know. I've also alerted our tech people, but I can hear everything just perfectly. So please, if somebody else out there is having difficulty with sound, just send it through Q&A and we'll try to see what's going on. Alex, the floor is now yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thanks to HBKU and QFC for inviting the ILO to this very important conversation, and great to be connected with our online participants. So for those who do not know the International Labour Organization very well, basically we are the labor rights organization of the United Nations. And what do? We are the guardian of international labor standards. These are, in a nutshell, 190 conventions that deal with all the different aspects of work. And their specificity is that they are negotiated by employers, by workers, and by government, and adopted also by those three parties to represent really the interests of everyone. We also support governments to implement those conventions, and I will speak a little bit about this today. Sometimes I think when we think about international labor standards, it's quite abstract, but in fact, they are really an excellent, a perfect decent work compass to analyze the response, the employment response during the COVID-19 pandemic. Why? Because in fact, those standards are the basic minimum social standards that have been agreed by international players and that we should look for when we are designing responses. Those standards, they deal with, as I said, all facets of works, but also facets of works that have been challenged, that have been rethought during the pandemic. So occupational safety and health, like Luigi mentioned, but also standards on working arrangement, working time, protection of specific categories of workers that are often more vulnerable during those crises, standards on non-discrimination, violence at work, prevention of violence at work. So basically, when we look at those standards, we look at how to integrate resilience into the world of work so that we recover better from this crisis. And this crisis, as Luigi mentioned, has been fully reviewing the concept of workplace and has been really, really challenging for many people around the world. Just to give you an update on the global numbers, 94% of people today live in countries with workplace closures. So really the majority of us. Working hour losses are much higher than estimated at the global level. Only in the second quarter of 2020, we have lost 495 million jobs worldwide. This is enormous. This is terrible. And linked to that, of course, higher level of unemployment, of inactivity, but also big loss in labor income. And what I want to say today is that despite this terrible employment crisis, there has been some very positive legal changes, policy changes adopted worldwide. And I wanted to highlight three very specific examples of concrete changes to employment laws that have taken place during the pandemic in Qatar, and that will and have already started to contribute to the recovery of this situation. The first one is linked to our Convention 29, which is the Forced Labor Convention. One element that derives from this very important convention that Qatar has ratified is that workers should have freedom to change jobs. And in that regard, Qatar has adopted, during the pandemic, really groundbreaking laws last August that fully reviewed termination of employment and rules, and that fully suppressed the no objection certificate to change jobs. And this, of course, provided workers with more protection, but it's also extremely positive for enterprises during the crisis. Why? Because it provided, for example, the possibility to recruit workers on the local labor market much more easily. And we know that this was specifically important for companies that could not recruit cross-border because of the closure of the borders. It also attracts more high-skilled workers that wouldn't have come without this freedom to change jobs. It's also motivating workers and pushing for higher retention rates in the companies. So I think this change in employment legislation during the pandemic was very bold. It brings a very good balance for everyone, and it's a win-win situation that contributes to economic recovery. The second changes in employment legislation that I wanted to highlight is linked to our Convention 131 on minimum wage fixing. That has not been ratified by Qatar yet, but that inspired legal changes that happened a few months ago. And at the international level, we just collected some new global data that show that people wages have fallen or grew more slowly globally during the COVID-19 crisis. And in that context, more than ever, minimum wages are part of a balanced policy response with a focus on the low-paid people. That if you look at numbers, low-paid workers have been the most affected by this pandemic with youth and the heaviest hit financially. So to invest in that, Qatar adopted a minimum wage law that is non-discriminatory across sector, and this put it really a floor in the labor market to protect people of sub-poverty wages. And this new law, one also very innovative aspect is that it sets a new accommodation allowance, minimum accommodation allowance, that will also help workers stay in decent accommodation and raise accommodation standards. And we know that during this pandemic, this is extremely important because a lot of the infection can happen in crowded accommodation. Lastly, I just wanted to briefly mention that there was also some very interesting changes being done, not legal, but at the policy level, that derive from our Convention 155 and 187, which is on occupational safety and health. And basically what those conventions says at the international, they set the obligation of what employers should do during the outbreak and what are the responsibilities also of workers during the outbreak. This was already part of the Qatar labor law, but what the government did is provide some very specific guidance on measures that companies should take to protect workers and mitigate the spread of COVID-19. They also produce guidance on the health of workers and also action for a safe return to work. And in addition to those very specific guidance notes, they issued last October, in the middle of the pandemic, a new occupational safety and health policy between the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Public Health. And this is very innovative because it's bringing together two of the major ministries to ensure really a coordinated and coherent approach when it comes to OSH. So I wanted to highlight those examples to show that even in this very difficult situation, there has been positive aspects, positive changes to employment legislation. I think that this pandemic has showed us where the gaps are, have pushed us to make bold choices that will build sustainable businesses and also more equitable societies. It has showed us that nothing is perpetual, that we will constantly need to adapt, and we know it's difficult. And in those examples I just discussed, I think international standards did provide a very positive inspiration to change in employment that are benefiting everyone, not only during the pandemic, but hopefully also beyond. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Alex, for giving us the international legal landscape and then linking the reforms in Qatar to that landscape, and in particular having, we say finding some positive words from a very difficult situation. And now we're going to hear from Sheikh Jassim, who is dealing with these issues in the workplace on a regular basis. And I think it's a perfect follow-up to Alex's presentation, given the changes she identified. So Sheikh Jassim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate this opportunity that brought forward this panel, and also the positive discussion about how to ensure our sustainable approach and measures applies and actually can support people rightfully. I'm here actually representing, I would say, the employer side of the experience and the outcome of how COVID actually applies and impacted us. First of all, I would also like to highlight, we are actually here operating in the state of Qatar, and I'm highlighting also the areas of experience that we've immediately seen and also supported differently here in the state of Qatar. So for one thing is, we need to say that we are very thankful for the accelerated, I would say, regulation changes, the accelerated also support that was also implemented here in the state. So laws helped us a lot. I would call it by miles, the moves and the changes actually supported everyone here mutually, the employee and the employer, which was also something very crucial to happen. The other side also of it, also we need to really understand there is I'm always saying it actually, that COVID would remind us of one thing is, which wasn't new, working from home. Everyone had that experience somewhere or another, or even staying at home waiting for either a decisive decision whether they are going to be continuing with, or where they will be actually working for, or in some unfortunate cases also redundancies. Here in Qatar, it was much minimal, I would call it, comparing to the other countries in the world. I've been seeing also the international landscape. It is quite drastic in some areas. So working from home, when we say working from home, everyone is having it in their book as a check mark. They would just apply it without taking the measures that will protect, I would say, the rights of both ends, the employee and the employer. We want performance, of course, but we need to ensure also the practice is not overtaking the personal area of their lives. Neither also the professional context of their work is not carried wrongly or disclosed wrongly back to their families or home. So we do actually highlighted a few items before we started working from home, from setting a good discipline, isolating yourself, making sure that you are in an environment where it can, I would say, simulate, not exactly, but can simulate sort of an isolated space in your home that you can operate with confidence as you are actually working. So also wearing for the occasion, doing check-in and check-outs in regular working hours, avoiding overlapping the time. One thing is, time was not even, I would say, regulated throughout the period. So people actually had an opportunity really to work, I would say, beyond their working hours. They had the flexibility sitting at home. They don't have much of activities. We discourage that. We want them really to work on regular hours, respect that they have families, respect that part also as well. The other side is, we did not stop also the other side, which is actually the human behind the performance. So there are emotions needs to be cared for, which is, I would highlight as very crucial part. So the social engagements, the activities, I would call also the different contexts, prizes, etc. We've done a lot of those engagements to ensure that they are connected together, and also they are connected on a human level, not just business-wise. I mean, we do business meetings and we do all those things, but we need to connect people also all the time in a way that supports them, in a way that they can feel they are somewhere like having their coffee time, you can say, or they can actually interact with each other in a way they can deliberate or talk about something else. But more importantly, without I would say, the preparedness or readiness of the digital platforms here in commercial bank, we couldn't actually achieve that. So also that accelerated everything about, about ours and also others, how to really make sure that we are in a digital space that we can comfortably perform with, we can offer to customers, we can offer also to our employees ways of communicating, working, and collaborating in different ways. Also, if I go to, let's just say, regulations and laws, we do have policies. We can actually push the book, but also we need to be very much thoughtful of what's in it, what it takes, how we can support people better rather than just to lay down the rules and the book. Here, actually, in commercial bank, we've done also our revisions with with the management as well to ensure that we give some flexibility and rationalizing our decisions. So one of the support areas, we did know that travel will no longer be as easy as it was before, taking in context limitation of how to travel, measures of quarantine, and you can call it even limitation of availability of airlines to travel for. So for all those elements, we've actually optioned to allow more for the more carry-over days to be carried for the year after. So we've done actually we've done 50% more than the normal, I would say, number of days we allow to carry, which actually allows them to carry, if they have that in their balance, up to 15 working days to the year after, in which they must utilize also in the first half of the year. The thing here is 2 weeks or 15 working days, sort of, you can say. 2 weeks is somewhere also comes with where the quarantine today is. And it allows people really to plan better, safer. That's more important, actually, to engage and to travel also. Most of people now do travel for their families rather than leisure or just for a vacation. But also, we will not discourage them from doing so, but we want them to do it safer in a way that it can help them actually to travel. What I'm saying here in conclusion, I mean, in all bigger picture here, we need to ensure that, first of all, we understand there is a human behind the performance, and that's important. And there is actually performance that the company wants. So by all means, we need to respect both ends, ensuring our regulations that can adapt to it, and our measures can actually support the different environments that comes with. We knew from day one, COVID will be temporary, but also temporary is a year, you can say. So putting it in context, we need to make sure that the regulations is sustainable for a year, and perhaps also will carry even more things from COVID experience forward. So one of the things that is being considered today is actually about working from home, and working from home is something that is practiced in many businesses now, considered to be carried as a normal operation. So really, I'm very much, I would say, appreciating this whole experience, and we need to take the best, support the people the best way so they can perform the best.
Great. Thank you so much, Sheikh Jassim, for picking up on some of the themes that have already been expressed and putting them into practical application. The notion of the need to adapt. A couple of times now we've heard about sustainability of any new system, flexibility of that system as well, and again the emphasis on humanity. We cannot lose sight of that. So when individuals, workers are at home, a lot of information is being transferred and the like. Privacy issues could come into play. And for our final panelists, we are delighted that Daniel will shed some light on I imagine, this and other issues. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Susan, for that warm introduction, and thank you very much for the opportunity to join this very important conversation. I think, as previously mentioned, the way we work and where we work has had to change in relation to the current situation. So this new flexibility has brought with it new risks, both to our organizations and to the data that we process, and the personal data in particular. So today I'll speak briefly about remote working and some of the issues that has, and I'll talk a little bit about monitoring staff in this new reality. So firstly, in relation to monitoring staff, I'll talk about So the devices that we use, I'll talk about email, I'll talk about cloud and network access, and I'll talk briefly about paper records and some of the risks and some of the mitigating actions that we might put in place to help manage those risks. So firstly, in relation to the devices themselves. So we have mobile phones, we have laptop computers, we have tablet computers, we have USB sticks that carry gigabytes of data. So this really helps with flexibility, but what it also does is it means that these devices are susceptible to being lost, to being stolen, to being misplaced, and the risk of that incurs. So we need to make sure that these devices are protected, that when they're brought home securely, always within our watch, that when they're not in use, that they are turned off and that they are locked away. And then when we are using them, if we do need to leave them unattended, that we have them locked again so that no unauthorized access can be achieved. What's also really important is that these devices have operating systems that need to be kept up to date, and say for laptops in particular, that the antivirus software is kept up to date, because this helps prevent against unauthorized digital access and helps against any cybersecurity threats. But more so, as we talked about, as Luigi said, like remote working can be from home, but also can be from an airport lounge. It can be from a coffee shop. So we need to be mindful of the people who are around us when we're working as well, because they might be able to see our screens and see what we're working on. They may be able to listen to our phone calls and hear what we're talking about. So extra care needs to be taken in these situations. Also, if the worst happens and a device is lost or stolen, it's very important that we contact our IT departments, who may be able to lock that device remotely, or even be able to wipe it of its contents, thus reducing the risk. So secondly then, in relation to our use of emails, I think it's very important that we follow our firm's acceptable email use policy as a general point. But specifically, work email should be kept really for work purposes, and personal email for others. Our personal email accounts tend to be provided by the likes of Google and are backed up separately to the cloud, where our work email is a little bit more protected, perhaps on our networks. And the second point, it might seem like a really obvious point, but always check who you're sending the email to, especially if you're sending large amounts of either personal data or sensitive data. So many times in my own career have I seen people, the tools like Outlook, autofill addresses that we've used previously, so it is very easy to accidentally send information to the wrong recipient. And then we should always think about whether or not email is the right tool to be sending personal data. When it comes to cloud and network access, again, the preferred choice will always be to use our firm's network or their approved cloud provider, and also follow any rules they have around password setting, access, and data sharing. But when we're working remotely, there may be times where we're not on the network and we have no access to any cloud providers. So it is very important, if we are saving any information locally, that is then backed up onto the network when we're back online, and any local versions or copies of data are removed and destroyed as appropriate. Paper records are another area of concern. I think people kind of sometimes forget that paper records have the same data protection implications as electronic records. So my general advice would be, try not to print out documents to be taken offsite. However, the reality is sometimes we need to do that. So where we have to, it's very important that those documents are treated confidentially, and then when they're not in use, even at home, that they're locked away, so other members of the family who really have no need or desire to look at them really can't get access to them. Also, the destruction of these documents becomes really important as well. It's very important they're not put into your domestic waste, where they're taken out by people who we don't necessarily know how they're treating that waste, but they're brought back into the office to be disposed of professionally and correctly. And then finally, it might be worth always keeping a record of what documents that we have printed and taken offsite. This is really good data governance, but it's also very useful if the worst does happen, the documents are lost or stolen, that we know what data may have been compromised and what level of risk that we're actually running. So when it comes to staff monitoring, and it's a question I get asked a lot, and it's can we monitor our staff when they're working remotely and also when they're working in the office? So the short answer to that question is yes, but with all processes that look at personal data, and monitoring of staff certainly does, you need to make sure that there's a very clear purpose for that monitoring activity and that we're only using the minimum amount of data necessary to achieve that objective. So it's very important that we realize our colleagues, they really have a right to a private life and to keep that private life private, but they're also entitled to a certain amount of privacy even in the workplace. So firms need to really consider what is the purpose of any monitoring activity. Is it to be able to identify if a piece of hardware is lost or stolen, or is it to provide a safe place to work? And once they have that purpose, then they need to think about what is the minimum amount of data collected to be able to do that. And there's lots of different types of monitoring activity. We might check internet usage for either duration or to make sure people aren't looking at incorrect websites. There may be ongoing monitoring activities that monitor, say, data loss prevention, watching emails leave our organization to check if QID numbers, passport numbers, or maybe even a credit card number is being sent externally. But what we need to do is be very mindful of who has access to that information, what is it being used for, and to ensure that it's only being used for the purpose that we have already designed, and that it's kept for no longer than is necessary. Because this is one that catches out a lot of firms. They do the monitoring activity and then the file just sits there indefinitely on the servers. However, once the purpose for processing is ended, that data should be deleted. But then there's also more intrusive forms of monitoring that we need to be very careful about, and some which we definitely considered excessive. So something very simple like using CCTV to check the quality of the work of our cleaning staff would definitely be deemed to be excessive. There are ways to check if our cleaning crews are doing the job that is necessary without necessarily having to invade their privacy in such a way as checking CCTV. But then there's also more intrusive ICT or computer-based monitoring activities that would definitely be deemed to be excessive. And these are things like keystroke monitoring and taking screen grabs of whatever the colleague is currently working on. And in some extreme cases, activating the webcams or activating the microphones on our portable devices. Again, very intrusive and generally would be deemed to be excessive. And this is even more so and more true in a world of remote working, where if I'm working at home or I'm working in a coffee shop or in an airport lounge, and if that camera is on or that microphone is on, it is likely to detect people who don't work for the organization and conversations that really they have no right or interest in getting their hands on. And then things like, GPS tracking is also, needs to be very carefully considered. So where a laptop might have a GPS chip installed so that we can locate it if it's lost or stolen, it then cannot be used to track the location of our staff member when the purpose is, as I said, for checking if it's lost or stolen. So I think, in a world as well where we're starting to bring our own devices to the office more, any tools that our IT departments might deploy to check those devices for vulnerabilities need to be careful that they're not scanning our personal information, and if they are, who has access to it? Is it excessive? And needs to really, be really carefully thought out. And I think the big takeaway from this, from a monitoring point of view, to be compliant with the local and QFC regulations in terms of data protection, and one of the key requirements is around transparency, is to have a policy and a procedure for our monitoring activity and make sure we tell our staff exactly what the purpose of those monitoring activities is, and let them know what their rights are as well in relation to this. That would definitely be key. So back to you, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for, I think, identifying a number of issues about when the workplace is the home. For example, you were talking about the need for your IT to be up to a certain speed, at a certain level, for protection and the like. In this era of hacking, to what extent does the company have to literally go into the home of each person to make sure that the network there is secure? And I would think if you're in the banking sector in particular, that would be a great, something that perhaps would be required. I think throughout this, you reminded me of the unsung heroes, the IT departments around the world that have made the ability to work to a certain extent seamlessly. They deserve a round of applause, and they have been working around the clock. So I would now like to open the floor to questions. We've had some very interesting questions come in. And the first one picks up on a theme or a concept that Louisa mentioned, and that is the issue of working at home and the role of women in the work at home, and concerns about the fact that there has been reports of an uptick in domestic violence against women due to the presence in the home and the like. From the perspective of employment law or regulations, and perhaps Alex, I could start with you on this because you may know the broader legal framework here. What legally can be done? Is this an employment issue? If you're aware, you as an employer are aware that one of your employees is in a vulnerable situation at home, yet you're asking them to work at home, and information comes to the employer about this, and maybe Jassim could follow up on this, and of course anybody else as well.
Thank you, Susan. I mean, from an international perspective, I would like to say that, in fact, our last convention, the Convention 190 of the ILO, which has been adopted, is on violence and harassment at work. So really deals with those specific issues. And we know that with remote work, this might obviously be happening. Now about the legal responsibility of the employer if there is knowledge about abuse or harassment. I think it will really depend also of the local context. So, and I don't know the domestic law of Qatar on this question, so I will leave it maybe to Jassim if he knows this particular question. But at the international level, now we have a very clear instruments that should regulate those situations.
Jassim?
Yes, thank you, Alex. In the term of employer relation to the employee, we do actually we have tested already. As an example here, in our experience, we have tested their I would call their ability to work from home and work remotely, given the tools, given the environment, given all the checks that actually can support them to work from home comfortably. Now, if that was not disclosed or raised as a concern that they cannot and will not be able to operate from their home, either for something they will disclose for us or something that they will not disclose, but they will option not to work from home. We are also hearing that flexibility always. Now, if I go to the area where actually you've tackled around in regards to domestic violence, I do encourage them, reach out to the authorities that can support you. So there are many authorities here in Qatar that in regards to either women or regards to domestic violence, or even legal entities that can support people. I do realize also with COVID, we've came into I would say a case of either people are getting to know more each other, and either they are linking better or clashing more. Okay, so we do actually encourage people to isolate work from personal as much as they can. If they can't, we will not ask them to operate or to work actually. And in the other context also, we should never, and I would never encourage anyone to have actually also, there are roles that cannot be working from home. There is there are some data sensitive information that cannot be shared to anyone or even exposed to anything out of the network you can control with, either by surveillance cameras or even by audit logs or whatever the situation is. So you need also to make sure that you can and you confirm that the environment is feasible and the information that they are working with is also allowed to be shared in a context they can work from their end, and we are trusting that confidentiality here. One thing to highlight here out of the whole thing, trust is a relation that was built throughout actually the consistent engagement and also the consistent support. So our employees, and thank God, I would say the majority, I can't vouch for everyone, but the majority we've seen, they do trust us. The function of human capital, and I have to also insist on this, I'm not trying to hijack by the human capital, I would say agenda, but the function is the support. It's not the control. We need to be aware of that point. So we are here in support as long as they ask us for.
Great. It's absolutely fascinating when I heard you speaking, Sheikh, about the extension of the workplace into the home, yet the limits of that, and particularly with regard to certain functions that still need to be in the office, okay, for security reasons and the like. And if I could just, as a matter of privilege, follow up with Daniel on this, and anybody else, Louisa, feel free to chime in as well. But Daniel, are there in the workplace, like at QFC, are there functions that simply have to be performed within a secure work environment, and for this category of work, working at home is going to be wholly impermissible?
So the data protection regulations and laws don't tend to get that specific, and it would be up to each organization to really think about what processing it's doing and whether it needs to kind of restrict certain activities from not being done at home and to be done in the office. From a QFC perspective, certainly some of our regulated entities may have certain activities, maybe in treasury functions, for example, that you wouldn't necessarily want being done outside of a secure environment, such as a treasury room or dealing room in a bank. But that being said, it's still up to each company to decide exactly where it needs to be. But the rules are pretty straightforward from a data protection point of view. Just the right level of control needs to be put in place in relation to the risk. So yeah, we do kind of push a lot of the emphasis back on the firms to think about how they're going to handle these situations.
Great, thank you. We had a second question that, and I think, Louisa, this would play on build up on some of the themes you discussed. And it was, in light of the new work culture, do we have an understanding of employee mindsets? And that is gathering data about functioning at home and productivity at home, and the tension, so to speak, of dealing with family and children and school getting canceled and things like that, and the individual welfare. Is that something at all that, do you know if there's any data out there? Is this being studied?
Well, thank you, Susan, and thanks to whoever has posed this question. It's actually one of the most crucial points and consequences of the remote work, because working from home has seen individuals shifting constantly from the role of worker to teacher with the kids who are doing homeschooling, from carers for elders, or for cook. So we all, and I include myself, we all had so many different roles that sometimes juggling between all of them was not an easy job. And of course, this caused also the excess of working hours, because we tend to work around the clock whenever we could perform the work at our very best, which caused inevitably an impact, especially on the loss of sleep, which then could lead to burnout. So the majority of employers, we had so many webinars and constant relationship with our clients, our employers in the QFC, where we supported them in talking a lot with the employees about as Sheikh Jassim has said, to show support and care towards those employees, not only to keep them engaged, but also and mainly to prevent the consequences of the excessive workload and the loss of boundaries between working life and private life.
Great. Does anybody else want to chime in on that question? We do have a number of questions that have come in, and some of them are really this is one of my favorites if I don't see a hand up on the other. And this question is, will the concept of work-related injury be redefined because of remote working? I think of somebody sitting at the computer at home and then having something in their home distract them and they get injured because of it. I mean, there's those kind of injuries, but there's also injuries associated just with the computer and the like. So are we going to see this expansion of injury to the home and the employer potentially assuming responsibility for this?
I believe, Susan, again, that as we said before, the new concept of workplace will need to include all places where workers perform the work on behalf of the employer, which can mean many things, including the additional risks, which are no longer only the one related to the specific nature of the work performed in the workplace. What happens at home will need to be addressed, including domestic violence, as we said before. So what we need, what policymakers will need to do is to address the new reality of a new definition of the workplace, and also of the risk assessment, because the employers have the obligation to provide a workplace which is free of risks to the health of workers. The problem is how to make sure that also the domestic risks or the risks that Daniel has emphasized of working in an airport lounge or in a coffee shop, how those will be addressed. Because of course, in a workshop, you will face, in a coffee shop, you will face risks to the health, which are completely different from the ones you have in the domestic environment. So this is why we need to review our legal framework to adapt those new challenges.
Yeah. Are there any other comments on that question? Go ahead, Alex, and then there's a specific question I want to follow up with you that's sent from one of our students, but go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Susan. No, I just wanted to say that recently I was looking at remote work statistic, the new statistic, and it says that the latest one says that approximately 18% of the jobs worldwide can be done remotely. So realistically, I think we still have to keep in mind that although in some sectors like the financial sector, the banking sectors, it's a very concrete conversation to have, because I think the majority of the position probably can be done remotely. I think we shouldn't forget that for the majority of workers worldwide, this will not be a reality tomorrow. I was also seeing that 40% of workers worldwide do not have access to connectivity, to internet. So you can imagine the challenge that it poses when now more and more things are done electronically. We do not travel anymore, as Mr. Jassim was saying. So it's creating really a bigger disparity. And I think that one of our challenges will be to constantly have a look at those different words that are being created and how to make sure that the regulation address both, and that instead of creating a higher divide between people that are extremely skilled, access to technologies is raising and other people are coming down. So I think that's one of our challenge in the coming years too. Thank you.
Great. And Alex, this question is from one of our students here at HBKU, and specifically asks, are there areas beyond which you spoke today relevant to Qatar where there could be priorities for reform, whether it be legal reform or best practices in light of the pandemic?
I mean, we are continuing to work together with the government, employers, and workers on reform. So it's really a continuous labor reform agenda. There are many more, I think, reforms in the pipeline. One area of work which one of my colleagues has been working on since 2 years is the establishment of joint committees at the enterprise level in Qatar to create really this dialogue between workers and employers on workplace issues. I think this is something that is continuing and in a way is also very positive in light of the pandemic, because workers and employer can exchange on issues of occupational safety and health, find solutions together, and that's definitely, yes, one of the other priorities.
Great. I have a couple of questions here that I think one is specifically addressed to Sheikh Jassim, but the other one as well I think would be appropriate for him. And the first one is do you think we're going to see a new form of employment contract mixing remote and office working? And the second question, Sheikh Jassim, is the importance of in-house enrichment programs to address stress, to understand the needs of your employees and the like. Is there an enhanced duty on behalf of the employer to engage in these programs to make sure that their employees are at a certain physical and mental level so that they can perform as expected?
Yes, so and actually in quick I would say outline here, you know, working remotely or actually working from home wasn't a new practice at all. Let's put that a very much a clear point. It has been there since even before, but I would say the extension of its application has changed drastically with COVID. So we applied it for the majority of people. We do actually, I mean, and I'm being here very much open and clear. In Qatar, we are very reserved and conserved about bringing new people into the work environment. However, business continues. So we have actually attached a lot of people to work from home, from their home countries, and those contracts are actually supporting us in order to reach our business goals. So in the other sense here, we are actually still continuing and having also terms about working from home for many roles. Now, how sustainable it is, we do see the value of social engagements that happens in the workplace, and collaboration where people meet face to face is actually quite crucial to ensure people are there and always collaborating. We've heard a lot of people were actually stating that, the Zoom meetings or the whole thing of remote meetings, somewhere they do miss seeing the people physically and actually getting engaged with them physically and really talking to them and hearing their voices without the layer of you can call network connection and network issues here and there. So overall, we do encourage people to actually be more engaged and safely, but also avoiding, I would call it the clash, the wrong exposure that happens with it. Now, in the other context, actually, on the second question, can you remind me what was it about?
Training programs and the like,
Yes.
or the contract. There was the first question was whether you're revising your contract. Secondly, training programs.
So in regards to the training, in regards to the stress management and training programs, if you outline it as stress purely, then you are actually addressing a specific problem. But also if you highlight it in different contexts. So what is stress is actually it's emotion that affects your performance. So the other side of the emotions, we encourage people, and we are starting, I would say, quite new and quite a lot of different social activities and also staff managed clubs. So those clubs would actually allow them to, I would call, really express their hobbies, their new abilities, and also their, I would call it, social engagements in different contexts with their colleagues. So there are various things from mental and also body-related clubs. So for the mental, you can have like, the reading, you can have also, the yoga, and also you can have also the different ones as football, basketball, and others, chess, many other activities. We allow them the flexibility really to do their own groups, and we support that highly. So in that sense, it's crucial really to ensure that people are able to safely collaborate, safely interact, and safely engage. I mean, we are emotional creatures. We are not creatures of, I would call it data. My background is in IT, and I do understand all the context that comes with it. I'm supportive really to really process things with no human interaction. But also there is a reason really you need to care about the human factor. No question about that.
What a great answer, because it picks up on the theme. There's no need to have a wellness session. Instead, people can develop themselves by the chess club or by having yoga online, that type of thing. We are out of time. Unfortunately, this conversation could go on for it could go on for days, as we know. But I would just like to thank each of the panelists for their outstanding contributions, and to our audience for asking wonderful questions. We still had more questions to go and I couldn't reach them. And as Louisa said, I would also like to thank my colleagues here at Hamad bin Khalifa University, Professor George Dimitropoulos, who worked with Louisa coming up with the idea of this event, Cindy Amanis, who is my colleague here who put it together and did a lot of preparation, as well as Azadine bin Abdenebi, who has helped us on the tech front as well. So I hope everybody has a good evening. If you are here in the Middle East, if you are in the States or in Europe, have a good day. And thank you again to the panel for your outstanding contributions. Bye-bye.
Thank you.